Hello random viewers and welcome to another episode of Kerbal Space Program. This is episode 25 and I'm doing another post-commentary. So yeah, here we go. This is one of the refueling ships on its way. It is beginning to near Duna and I'm not sure exactly what it's doing. Here we go. Here is the Ares ship. It is also on its way and it is lining up for some maneuvers so that it can stop in Duna's orbit. Here's that refueling ship arriving. That docking port looks crooked. Apparently it's not. That's good, because I'm going to need that later. This is right before the aero breaks, so we're going to begin retracting solar panels and radiators because we do not want to have those fly off. We need those. The two refueling ships will be using aero braking, whilst the Ares ship will not, because it has sensitive heat shields, which we need for re-entry to Kerbal and re-entry to Duna's atmosphere for landing. We don't want either of those losing any of their ablator because we want it to have that. So an aero brake would damage those, and because of that, it will use its own fuel to stop. It does have plenty, especially with these refueling ships on its way to refuel it. Neither of these refueling ships dock with the Ares ship in this episode, just due to time constraints. It does take quite a while. They have to slow down on their own, and that'll be in the next episode. Here is the refueling ship at around the height of its aero braking. Due to the thinness of Duna's atmosphere, it does need to use its engines as well as the atmosphere to slow down. It has air brakes, which do help significantly, but it's still not quite enough and it does need those engines. At this point it gets pretty low in the atmosphere, but that's fine. It does have a lot of speed to lose to get into a safe Duna orbit where it won't be flung back out into orbit around the sun, because that would be very unfortunate. We spent a lot of money to send these here, and we need them to refuel the Ares ship. We don't need them in orbit around the sun. Now we're back with the Ares ship. It is descending towards Duna to perform its capture maneuver. This will be another burn of its four main engines, which are kept at the drive section. I don't think I have the footage of that burn, but this is after we've captured successfully and done some science. This is Bill or Bob, I think it's Bob, whichever one's the scientist, just doing an EVA to pick up some crew reports and other scientific data taken from orbit around Duna. This is where the first landing craft detaches from the Ares ship. It has the large fairing to protect all of the sensitive components that are necessary for ascent and return to Duna orbit. It also helps protect the science module that is kept up above the ship. You can see it up there. That was added later because I forgot to add science modules, but it's also nice to have a base once you're on Duna. We almost hit one of the gravity rings on our way out. I also forgot an orbital maneuvering system, so I have to use the RCS to deorbit, but that's fine because we have plenty of RCS in reserve. It uses the RCS to go on a suborbital trajectory, and then it uses the atmosphere to slow down the rest of the way. This is its entry into Duna's atmosphere. After it's gone through the worst of it, it jettisons the fairing and the fairing base, which stays attached just due to aerodynamic forces, but once the parachutes begin deploying, that fairing base falls away. We had some issues with the parachutes. I forgot to change their settings. Duna's atmosphere is very thin, and they're set to work on Kerbal, not on Duna. So I had to go through and change all the settings so that we could slow down in time. The other thing about this ship is the sheer number of parachutes it has. That is simply because it's just so heavy, and with the atmosphere being so thin, that's what we're forced to do. But even with the sheer number of parachutes, which you are about to see, it still needs its engines to land. The science module does not. We jettison that, and it lands just fine on its landing gear. Here's me trying to deploy the main chutes and realizing that I have to change the settings on them as well. That takes quite a while, and we'll fast forward to where they finally open up all the way. Here's the large number of parachutes I was talking about. My editor commented that it looks like some kind of weird bulbous thing. He's not wrong. Here's where we jettison the science module. That goes under its own parachutes. It's so lightweight it carries next to nothing. Those hitchhiker storage containers are quite light, and then besides that it only has science modules. This ship is laden with a ton of fuel so that it can ascend back into Duna orbit. So I proceed to tilt it over and fire its engines. That way the science module does not land on top of it. I want them to land next to each other. That way we have a base and then the ascent stage to get back into Duna orbit. Once the maneuver's done to get it out of the way, it immediately has to begin landing, and I get sticky keys. But it does land successfully. This was my second attempt because it fell over on the first one. Sticky keys was no help to that, but I got it. Here we're deploying the ladders so that the Kerbals can crawl down from their command module and walk on the surface. You have to close those doors because they're in the way of the ladder. Here goes the last ladder deploying, and we have a Kerbal coming out. I don't think it's Valentina, it's one of the randoms that got involved. So she's on her way down the ladder, and she's going to go and plant a flag. Then we have some issues with the ladder, kind of sticking, and then I'm very, very glad she did not fall flat on her face. I remember Jebediah falling flat on his face the first time he walked on the moon, but this Kerbal, can't remember her name, she did not. She landed beautifully and then put down a flag after she walked a good distance away so it would not be knocked over. The Apollo astronauts didn't make that mistake. They put their flag too close, and when their engines fired, they knocked over the flag that they'd worked so hard to plant. So I try not to repeat that mistake. Then we put the last of the Kerbals into their habitat, which is a lot more comfortable than the command module. We then have to detach the other landing ship. Its landing footage is not recorded. You can see this massive lag spike. That's what I had to deal with. Once this finally loaded out of physics range, this landing ship, there was a small enough number of parts that it ran well. And then we have the other landing is done. I don't know what happened to that footage, but it's gone. Here is one of the refueling ship's boosters re-entering the atmosphere. Off camera we had detached this booster because we just didn't need it. The refueling ship had its own engines, and it was at the point where it was getting very close to its docking. I still haven't done that quite yet, but it is in the plans. And here's the explosion. Very nice. The next step after a few days was to bring the last Kerbal from the first landing back into their ascent ship. So this is the one we watched land. The other one that we did not watch land is still sitting there. I'm going to leave it there for a while, just because I have to dock refueling ships. And that takes time, and I don't need to be worrying about a second spacecraft flying around. So this last Kerbal gets on board, and it takes off, leaving its landing gear behind. It's a pretty boring ascent. There's just not a lot of terrain to look at, as my editor reminded me. It's fun to watch launch into Kerbal because you have continents and water and all that cool stuff. There's nothing but orange and red here. Anyways, this ship just does a pretty standard boring ascent. I way over-engineered this craft. I didn't have any idea how much it would take to get off of Duna's surface. So it had ridiculous amounts of fuel, and I had to ditch quite a bit of it, just because that stage is too bulky, and I need this stage, which has its own fuel and RCS for docking. It can now turn quite easily and perform its maneuvers. Here's that ascent stage, crashing back into the surface. Pretty interesting crash, sent some pieces flying like that. We then have the docking, and this was the last thing I had time for in this episode. This docks to the back of the Ares ship because it needs that science module. We're going to send this little piece of the ship to Ike to get some science there. I plan on attaching one of the refueling ships so that it has even more fuel, and that refueling ship will use the last remains of its fuel to take that little section over to Ike. It's also another science module. So thank you so much for watching. Please do like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you next episode, and I hope you all have a very nice day.